Howdy, partners. Welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. We're doing a Western today, and this is being recorded in December of 2025. I try to do Christmas-related movies in December if I can, and this is a Christmas-related movie. I think you could even call it a Christmas movie. It does loom somewhat large in the film. On the other hand, it's mostly a Western action comedy film, so it's debatable either way. I think, though, you could kind of call it a Western classic due to a scene that happens towards the end of the film. I think that kind of makes this a more important movie than it otherwise would be. So we're going to go through this film, look at the scenes, talk about the characters and themes and all that kind of good stuff. That does mean, of course, as with pretty much all of my reviews, or just about all of my reviews, there are going to be spoilers in this one. Now, look, it's a pretty straightforward Roy Rogers Western, so we're not talking about complexities of plot. But like I said, there is a scene towards the end that's kind of cool. And, if you don't want to know in advance, you might want to go find this movie to watch. It's unfortunately not real easy to find. There is a copy on YouTube that was taken from an old TV show that Roy Rogers and Dale Evans used to host, where they would look at his old movies. But unfortunately, that version does cut a couple songs out of the movie. So I found a copy on VHS that was thankfully still actually in the shrink wrap. And it worked. It worked well. And there I got the full thing. And the quality was a little bit better. At any rate, you might want to go watch the movie if you can find it before you watch the review. But there are going to be some spoilers. So let's jump into this. So we are talking about Trail of Robin Hood from 1950. Just so you know, has nothing to do with Robin Hood. It's not mentioned. Nothing in it really makes sense in terms of Robin Hood. Why it was called Trail of Robin Hood, I do not know. It's just one of those mysteries. This was Roy Rogers' last true color film. And like I said, you can find copies out there. It was hard for me to get one, find a really good copy to get the still frames from. So bear with me on the quality of the images. Did the best I could do. So obviously our stars in this film are Roy Rogers and Trigger. No Dale Evans in this one. This is 1950. Roy was, in that King of the Cowboys sort of phase, but maybe Gene Autry wasn't quite, off the throne yet at that point. So it's not, we don't get Happy Trails. We don't get Dale Evans. It's not that kind of Roy Rogers product. They are accompanied, Roy and Trigger, in this film, by Penny Edwards as Toby Aldridge, and Gordon Jones is going to play Splinters McGonagall. He is the comedy relief. Penny got her start on Broadway at the age of 12, and she did a lot of Westerns. Gordon Jones is maybe best known now, well, among old people like me, for playing Mike the Cop on Abbott and Costello TV show. He played this character in a few different Roy Rogers films. And he also worked with John Wayne quite a bit. The movie is written by Gerald Garady, who wrote lots of Western pictures. And he also wrote the Gene Autry comic strip. Yeah, Gene Autry had his own comic strip back in the day. I do want to point out Howard and Theodore Lydecker. The Lydecker brothers did special effects for a lot of Republic serials. This is a Republic film, including Adventures of Captain Marvel, which I've reviewed on this channel. They were nominated for an Academy Award for Women in War and Flying Tigers, and they won the Emmy for Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. So they were real pioneers in the world of special effects. The movie is directed by William Whitney. He directed a lot of Republic serials, including the very well-regarded Daredevils of the Red Circle, which I think is the first movie serial I ever watched. When I worked at the video store back in the 80s, they started releasing the serials in these 2 tape, VHS tape sets. I think that was one of the first ones. Tarantino has proclaimed him one of the greatest action directors who has ever lived. His favorite of his films being The Golden Stallion, Stranger at My Door, the Bonnie Parker Story, and Paratroop Command. You might want to go check those out. The film begins with Roy Rogers coming upon some shady characters who are chopping down trees to be sold as Christmas trees. From the look of them and the fact that they take off running, we can be sure that they are not doing this legally. As he lights off after them, another man rolls up in a Surrey with a fringe on top. This is Jack Holt, former movie cowboy and now a grower of Christmas trees. Now, Holt really was a Western actor, and he plays himself in the film, although obviously a somewhat fictionalized version of himself, because I don't think he owned a big Christmas tree spread. He worked in movies from the silent era into talkies before he was an actor. He did all sorts of jobs, including construction. He was a surveyor, laborer, prospector, trapper, and stagecoach driver. He was a captain in the Army Quartermaster Corps in World War II, and he would sadly pass away about a year after making this film. But it kind of tells you there was a time when you had a lot of actors who had very full lives before they went into acting. Now, you still will get some folks who do things like that, but more often actors are people who have been training from a very early age to go into theater or go into movies, TV. And I think they lose something because of it. I think a guy who's actually done all this physical labor is just going to come off different in a film about a character who's a little more rugged. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call him blue collar exactly, since she's like the owner of this ranch and an ex-movie star, but you get the idea. Rugged, working in the wilderness or in the wild, that kind of thing. Well, Jack gives chase as well, but he's far behind. Roy chases the wagon to the J.C. Aldridge Christmas Tree Cutting Camp #1, Mitch McCall foreman. Now, since this is an action movie, we get right into it. Roy confronts the guy on the wagon for chopping down trees on someone else's property. So the guy jumps him. We get a fist fight. We're not yet 8 minutes in. We've already had a chase and a fight. That's how action movies are supposed to work. Now, Roy ends up fighting two of the crooks. When one of them goes for an axe, Roy's dog, Bullet, enters the fray. My dog would have probably gotten involved long before that, although he probably would have been attacking me just because it looked fun. Well, after they've had enough, the foreman, McCall, shows up, and then Jack arrives. He introduces Roy as the local head of the U.S. Soil Conservation Service. So he's a government man in this one, almost like a park ranger kind of deal. Now, McCall makes the pitch for doing the cutting and hauling for Jack. Just let us do it. Contract. A lot of other people have done that in the valley. Now, Jack's going to do his own cutting and hauling. He's going to sell his trees for what it costs to raise and haul them, because he's not looking for profits. He wants to make sure as many people as possible can afford a Christmas tree. Now, McCall warns that this could run the Aldridge Syndicate out of business. That just might be a plot point. Well, any profit Jack makes off of selling the trees, he says he's given to the children's home. Kids like that made it possible for me to become a star, so he wants to give back to them. So Jack wants to be charitable, and you just know that J.C. Aldridge is not really going to like that. And speaking of J.C. Aldridge, we now meet the old Scrooge himself. He's your typical old school tycoon in movies, yelling at subordinates on the phone, smoking a cigar, super busy, or actually maybe a cigarette. Well, he's smoking either way. Super busy, the kind of guy who's always sort of frantic. He's played by Emery Parnell, a vaudevillian who appeared in over 250 films in his career. The key question with these kind of characters is, just how bad are they? And you can maybe add to that, can they be reformed? Well, he's joined here by his daughter, Toby, played again by Penny Edwards, who's also part of the business. Now, naturally, she's a little more pleasant than Dad is, but she's still a businesswoman at heart. So, okay, is she going to be a good guy? Is she going to be a bad guy? We'll find out. Well, they get a call from McCall. Lets them know Holt will not sign with them. And Toby tells McCall to leave it to her. She'll be there tomorrow. She'll seal that deal. Well, back at Glen Cove, they're having a turkey shoot, which basically means they're shooting skeet, and the winner gets a turkey. So they're not running around, shooting turkeys. So we now meet our comedy relief for the film, Splinters McGonagall, played by Gordon Jones. He misses his shot, but Sis McGonagall, played by Carol Nugent, picks it off with her slingshot to keep him in the competition. Now, she wants to save the turkey from being Christmas dinner. That's kind of what she's after here. When Toby arrives at the turkey shoot, she walks out into the shooting range, and Splinters accidentally tosses all of the loaded skeet at her, like hits a little lever or something. She is not very amused, but the crowd is quite amused. And as a result, Splinters winds up with an injured arm, and Sis has to step in to win the turkey, which she names Sir Galahad. This turkey and his ultimate well-being are a subplot through the movie. Well, while Sis wins the turkey with her excellent shot, Toby gets to work on Jack Holt. She gets in line for an autograph. Mostly it's kids trying to get the autographs, but this is kind of to wile her way into his confidence. She does pretty well, but Roy is alerted to the fact that she's an Aldridge, and he lets Jack in on it, so that's strike one. Now, we also get a song here in this scene called Jubilee. Some of the lyrics are in Spanish. Of course, Roy Rogers is singing it. Note, that is one of the songs that gets cut out of the TV edit, so you're only going to get that if you buy it like a copy on DVD or VHS. Well, naturally, Toby isn't going to be, put off just that easily. Both of the crews are racing to get their trees to market first, and they only have 3 days to do it. So we're set a ways ahead of Christmas, although the Christmas tree lots didn't used to set up quite as early as they do now. They might only set up like a week or so before Christmas. So we're close. This would probably be, set in December at some point. Well, the Aldrich saboteurs now strike. First, a rope is cut and horses are stampeded. Roy grabs trigger and rushes off to get them under control. And then they find that their water supply, this big barrel, has been drained. Somebody knocked a hole in it. And obviously they can't work horses without water. So they got to call it quits for the day. And obviously Toby plays rough, and she plays for keeps based on all of this sabotage. So maybe she is just as bad as her father. Well, Splinters shows up the next day with Sis and Sir Galahad the turkey to fix the water wagon. And they see the saboteurs at work pouring kerosene over another wagon so they can light it on fire and then push it into the other wagons and set all of them on fire. Splinters remains behind to watch them while Sis goes to fetch Roy. He sets off at top speed as soon as he gets the news, while Splinters is fighting the two saboteurs who have succeeded in starting the blaze. They knock Splinters out, and the burning wagon is rolling down the hill towards him when Roy manages to rope the wagon and pull it over just before it was going to hit Splinters. So it's a nice bit of action work, a nice bit of stunt work. Good job on that one. Splinters, of course, is okay. So Roy chases after the bad guys. There are leaps over tree trunks, a really wild ride through the woods that leaves one saboteur unhorsed. Roy stops to check him out, and it looks as though he died from the fall. Well, we then see McCall conversing with Toby. He tells her that everything is right on schedule. He suggests that she just goes back to the city. He's got everything handled. Well, she says, no, I'm going to stick around, at which point Roy arrives at the camp looking for the other saboteur. Roy confronts McCall about the sabotage, and McCall claims that he had fired the guy who did it. Roy warns him that if he finds the guy in this camp, there's going to be trouble, but then Toby gets involved, and McCall tries to get the crew to throw Rogers out before Bullet shows off his pearly whites and convinces the crew that they need to stay out of it. So Roy and McCall have it out. McCall pulls a knife, obvious villain behavior, but Roy kicks it away from his hand, I think, ends up, kicking his butt. He warns them if anything else happens in Holt's camp, he'll bring the sheriff out to shut them down. Now, a big part of these Westerns was the exhibition of virtues. They were meant primarily for children. So they're trying to give you an idealized version of the American virtues. You could just call it old-fashioned American virtues, maybe. But they really are timeless virtues when you get down to it, and really kind of extend beyond borders. Friendliness, loyalty, honesty, fairness, like fairness in a fight. Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, and most of the other Western heroes were a big part of transmitting these virtues to kids back in the day, not so much with lectures, but by showing these virtues in action. We're also left at this point in wondering if Toby really is aware of what McCall is up to and the sabotage. Maybe she's not as bad as we've been led to believe. Well, we next get some comedy relief with Splinters and Sis as they pull into town that night and spy on one of McCall's boys in Roy's office. Sis is part of the exhibiting virtues bit I was just talking about. She's ready to go in there alone and armed if Splinters doesn't do it. She's got courage, plucky American spirit. That's something you wanted to show to kids, although, obviously Splinters doesn't let her do that because it'd be a little bit dangerous. You don't want to put kids in harm's way. Well, the man in the office is a guy named Channing. He is the second saboteur. He stumbles out, says the last thing he remembers was waiting by the hotel, and then he falls. He was stabbed. So he has been eliminated. Apparently, this was McCall's plan to get rid of a witness who knows what he's been up to while framing Roy Rogers for the murder. The guy's a real jerk. Well, Toby calls her dad, who's getting a manicure, to tell him about the murder and how the sheriff is questioning both camps. And this is another important aspect of these Westerns, the dichotomy between rural America and urban America, blue-collar, regular folks versus city slickers who get manicures and are willing to do anything for a buck. But it's not always simply just rural good, urban bad. It actually does get down to the character level, but it plays on these sort of attitudes that people have one way or the other, sometimes to kind of invert them a little bit for you. Well, when the sheriff and Roy visit the Aldrich camp, Toby and McCall begin putting the frame on Roy. And like I said, we're supposed to be wondering through a lot of this movie if Toby is in on it or not. And this, again, gets into another aspect of the films, is the villain who reforms. Toby doesn't seem all that bad, and it would be a shame if she was, really just a dirty rat, but maybe she isn't, or maybe she is, but she'll see the light. So you want to have a villain, at least one villain in a movie like this that could maybe go either way, that's maybe a little bit more vague. Well, Roy and the sheriff leave, as does Toby, and then a new hire in the camp overhears McCall and a henchman admitting to being involved in Channing's murder and plotting to steal the money for the trees from Aldrich. He lets them know that he knows and expects a little something to keep quiet, but this new hire is a little bit familiar. While the villains are doing their thing, the good guys are doing theirs. A Christmas tree tying party, the whole town coming together to help Jack Holt get his trees to market. So neighbors helping neighbors, doing something charitable, etc. Again, showing what it means to be a real American. Now, Toby shows up and she's mad that the telegraph office is closed for the party. Roy ribs her a bit over it. Looks like he's not convinced that she's definitely one of the bad guys here. At least he doesn't act that way. Now, I love this shot of the party. You got the Christmas tree lit up. The ambiance of the place just screams a good old-fashioned Christmas. And we get a song here about a Christmas tree for Johnny, which again is cut out of the TV version, so you're going to need to get another one if you want to hear that song. Folks in the 1950s were feeling, I think, like they were losing something important. Just as many people are feeling that today. Lots of technological change back then, and the coming together that many people had experienced during World War II was sort of starting to break down, starting to be, every man for himself, keeping up with the Joneses a little bit. I think it was some people were getting they were missing something they felt, a little closer during the war years. And again, rapid change. The kids are moving away, leaving rural America oftentimes, but even just leaving the city where they were born and raised to find work somewhere else. Things were starting to change. And I think a lot of the people, they see something like this and it really was important to them. And again, I think we're kind of going through that today with a lot of the rapid technological change and the way it's breaking up, the old relationships that we were all kind of relied on. Well, while folks are tying up trees, Toby really wants to send that telegram. Her father left for the camp 2 days ago, and she hasn't seen him. So she's worried. McCall admits that he wouldn't know the guy if he did see him. And obviously, that's a big plot point. When McCall goes to check on his henchmen, who are preparing to burn down the livery stable, which is right next to the building where everybody's having this big tree tying party, one of them turns out to be none other than Mr. Aldridge, pulls a gun to stop the sabotage. Well, maybe the rich urban J.C. Aldridge isn't so bad either. McCall gets involved, hits him from behind. He's got a plan for Mr. Aldridge here. While folks at the party are enjoying one of Jack's old movies, which, from what I can tell, is not actually an old movie that he made, McCall lights the stable on fire. There's a bit in the movie with a building on fire, and Splinter goes, it looks so real, I can actually smell smoke. And then, of course, they quickly realize that the building is ablaze. Roy gets the women out, quickly puts them into work rescuing the Christmas trees. He even gets Toby involved as well. And then he and some others start rescuing horses from the burning stable. Again, the old virtues. Splinter and Sis do some comedy relief with a broken down old fire truck, so you get a little bit of that. In the midst of the chaos, Sis realizes that Sir Galahad is still in the building, the burning building. She rushes in to save him, and then Jack rushes in to save her. Well, ultimately, Splinter gets Sis and Galahad out, and Roy and Bullet save Jack, who is overcome from the smoke. About this time, Toby starts to realize that things are getting out of hand here. This isn't just a competition to be the first to market. There's something more going on. And she's starting to get suspicious, maybe of her foreman. Well, Jack winds up in a daze, seems to believe that it's actually Christmas time, and it doesn't look like he's going to make it to actual Christmas. Well, Toby approaches Roy and the gang to tell them how sorry she is. The group decides to put on a Christmas dinner for Jack, tell him that it is Christmas, the trees have already been delivered, and Toby, she offers to help with dinner and all that kind of stuff. So it looks like maybe she's actually not so bad either. And we now know for sure that McCall is the snake behind all the problems, and he's even working against the Aldridges. Now, of course, the bad news here is that Sir Galahad is on the menu, and Sis is just brokenhearted over this. Well, the Christmas dinner gives Penny Edwards and the writers of the Purple Sage a chance to sing "Every Day is Christmas in the West." This is because there's, pine trees everywhere. It's a really good song. To me, it ought to get some more playtime this time of year. And of course, Roy Rogers joins in the song as well. Well, Jack feels better, and he's happy to think that the trees have been delivered on time. Sis, of course, isn't too enthused about dinner. And in fact, nobody is when they think about how much they all liked Sir Galahad the turkey. Even Bullet doesn't want any turkey this year. But of course, Splinter didn't kill Sir Galahad. So everybody cheers up and tucks in. Of course, some turkey, bought it, but at least they didn't know who he was. Anyways, the troubles, however, are not over yet. Doc shows up and lets them know that one of the wagon drivers that's going to take their trees to market was ambushed and beaten up. So all the other ones are quitting. They don't want to get beaten up right before Christmas. They got families to worry about, etc. Well, Jack actually knew all along that it wasn't Christmas. He played along just the same because he knew everyone was doing it for him. And he said, well, and now Roy absolutely has to get my Christmas trees to market because he promised me that it already happened. And here's where Sis notices all the photos of old Western stars on Jack's wall, old friends of Jack from his acting days. And Sis wonders if they could drive a wagon. And Jack doesn't really know what she's leading up to, but he's like, well, of course, any good cowboy can drive a wagon. Well, McCall sends one of his henchmen into town to keep an eye on things and let him know if they manage to hire any more wagon drivers. And in fact, they cannot. And it looks like it's just no use until a stranger arrives in town. You remember I said there's a bit at the end That's really, really cool. And I think kind of elevates this film in its importance from just being a typical sort of Roy Rogers action comedy Western. Well, the visitor, the stranger, is Allan Rocky Lane and his horse, Blackjack. Yes, horses deserve name recognition as well, because we're talking about old Westerns. Now, Lane is probably best known for playing Red Ryder in numerous films, and he was the voice of Mr. Ed on the Mr. Ed Show. Such a great show. It really, Mr. Ed, it's a lot smarter than a lot of people think. Smarter than it seems. Well, he is soon joined by Monte Hale, Western film star and country musician. He was in some of the first color Western movies. By 1947, he was usually joined by sidekick Paul Hurst and the Sons of the Pioneers on musical backup. Sons of the Pioneers, of course, the band that Roy Rogers was with originally, kind of before he got into acting, and he was primarily just singer. And then we got Bill Farnum, who rode with Jack many years ago. His film career went back to 1914. At this point, it is revealed that Sis is the one who sent for all of these guys. Then Ray Corrigan crashes the party, stuntman and actor, did many Western pictures, and he did the great Undersea Kingdom serial. If you never watched it, you really should. And he often played a gorilla in movies using his own gorilla costume. So you see a gorilla in an old movie, there's a chance that Crash Corrigan is inside that gorilla costume. He owned a movie ranch called Corriganville that was used for a lot of Westerns back in the day. It was eventually bought by Bob Hope, who renamed it Hopetown. And then we get three more arrivals: Kermit Maynard, Tom Keene, and Tom Tyler. Maynard was another actor, stuntman who did lots of movies and TV Westerns. Tom Keene did a lot of Westerns and a couple Dick Tracy serials. His final role was in the infamous Plan 9 from Outer Space. And Tom Tyler starred in the Captain Marvel and Phantom serials, both of which I've reviewed on this channel. He would sadly pass just 4 years after this movie was made. Well, all of this is observed by McCall's henchman, and McCall's henchman is being observed by Bullitt. But here we go. We're not finished yet. We've met the Western heroes. Now, George Chesebro appears in a black hat, of course, and nobody quite wants to shake his hand. That's because he made a career out of playing the bad man in old Westerns, starting his career in 1915. Now, this is all played for laughs. Sis says that you always played the meanie, and he replies, well, I know, but after making 20 films with Jack Holt, he reformed me. So he's welcomed into the gang as well. Well, Bullitt chooses now to strike, ripping into the evil henchman and alerting the rest that he's here. Roy wants him to answer some questions, but he ain't talking. So the Western heroes give him a little demonstration of their sharpshooting. The crook is standing beneath this heavy wooden sign, held up by several ropes. Rocky Lane takes the first shot, snapping one of the ropes. After several great shots, the bad guy finally blabs, pointing the finger at McCall as the man behind all the trouble. He also tells them that Toby's father is at the camp as a prisoner. This was really a clever way of using these Western heroes in this film, giving them a chance to show their shooting skills. And that, I think, is why it elevates the film, because you got some of the great Western stars of the past all coming together in this movie. If you think about it, it'd be like having like a cop movie in the 1990s, and you get like a whole bunch of TV detectives from the 70s, maybe late 60s, to show up to help the detectives solve the case. I mean, it's really cool to see all these people on the screen at the same time, especially some of the older guys who hadn't really, done so many movies for a while. Just Westerns were becoming a big deal on TV at the time. You see it made fun of in a lot of old cartoons that turn on a TV in the 50s and it's a Western on one channel and a Western on the next channel, a Western on the, and a lot of it was the old Western movies because they were relatively cheap and they had made a ton of these things. So as they said at one part in the movie with Jack Holt, these people want to get autographs. And he's like, oh, well, I haven't made those movies in a long time. It's like, yeah, but they're all on TV. And he goes, oh, I know they are. So this is kind of bringing these old guys back because kids started seeing them in movies again and they kind of knew who they all were. Similar thing happened to the Three Stooges. They start playing old Three Stooges stuff on TV in the 50s and into the 60s. A whole new generation of kids discover the Stooges. It's why they got to make some movies later on, with Curly Joe DeRita, because kids knew who they were again all of a sudden. So I just love that they do this in the movie. Well, Toby rushes off to the camp to rescue her dad. So Roy sends the heroes to drive all those wagons of Christmas trees to market while he and Splinters go after Toby to help her out. On the way, they meet a latecomer, Rex Allan, the Arizona cowboy, movie star, songwriter, narrator of many Disney nature films, and the classic Charlotte's Web. He was also a cousin of Glenn Strange, famous, of course, as Sam the bartender on Gunsmoke, but also maybe more famous for playing the Frankenstein monster for Universal in a whole lot of films. Well, when Roy, Splinters, and Toby get to the camp, the guard rushes off, and they quickly free the great J.C. Aldridge. They kind of give him a little crap. At least Toby gives him a little crap at the time. He tells them that he has been double-crossed. Along with Toby, McCall is going to burn the Red River Bridge to stop Holt's trees from getting through. Well, Roy leaps on trigger, and with Bullet, he races for the bridge as the wagons are rolling. You see him going by each wagon with the different, Western heroes on them. It's really pretty cool. So he gets them rolling at top speed. You got to move fast. He's going to try to burn the bridge. And then he heads off to try to stop McCall from doing it at all. But McCall has already set brush under the bridge aflame. So now it's a real race against time for those wagons. When Roy Rogers arrives, he spots the lowdown Dirty Snakes, leaps into battle. I love that scene. I love how he does that. Again, a lot of great stunts in this movie. It really is a solid action film. We get this great fist fight against the backdrop of the burning bridge. Of course, Bullet gets some licks in as well, but the bridge is going up fast. Will there be enough time? The wagons start rolling across the bridge, the cowboys doing their best to shield themselves from the flames, and Sis and Galahad are the last ones across just before the bridge collapses. Yeah, dude, Sis kicks butt in this movie. She's a scrapper. She's driving one of the wagons. I love Sis in this movie. McCall flees from the scene, and Roy gives chase, of course, and rides into an ambush. We get a little bit of a gunfight. I mean, what kind of Western would it be without a little bit of a gunfight? And finally, as McCall attempts to escape on this old mill, he meets his dishonorable end when an old board gives way. So the villain, basically, his own actions lead to his demise. It isn't Roy that actually, kills the guy or something. You don't want to do that in an old Western, generally, when it was made for kids. Well, Jack manages to pull through after all, and J.C. Aldridge and Toby have seen the light. He's going to partner with Jack. They're going to sell their trees so cheap that, people aren't going to be able to believe it. So again, we get this whole concept of old American virtues, and it seems to be rural versus urban at one point. It seems to be, the blue collar versus white collar versus rich people. And what it really comes down to, and I think this is encapsulated really well here, it's about individuals. All right, J.C. Aldridge is a hard competing businessman, and maybe that gets the better of him a little bit. But ultimately, J.C. Aldridge, the individual, is a decent guy, and he sees the light and what's going on here and decides, yeah, let's not try to, sell the trees for as much profit as we can. Let's make sure everybody can have a Merry Christmas. Very fundamental to American values. Sometimes it gets framed as, oh, those rich guys on Park Avenue, they're no good. A lot of American movies will have, what they actually do is they kind of show the folks who had to make that money in the first place themselves. They still have some of those old American values in them. They may get a little off kilter because of all the money. It's oftentimes their kids who are kind of the spoiled brats who are the problem. You'll see stuff like that in My Man Godfrey and many, many, many others. Again, transmitting the American values of hard work, of enterprise, of individualism, but also of being honest, playing fair, and all those kind of things as an individual. Got that in a lot of these films. You certainly get it in this one. We close with another rendition of Every Day is Christmas in the West, and a final bit of comedy as Galahad, up on the roof again, lays an egg, which lands on Splinter's face. And there you go. And then Roy and Trigger ride off, not into the sunset, but into snowfall, because this is the West and there's always work to be done. He's got to get out there and check some fences. So here you go. Trail of Robin Hood is a great little movie for the Christmas season. You get some music, you get some comedy, some Western action, and it's good Western action, horse riding, fist fights, a little bit of gunplay, and a reunion of some of the great Western movie stars of the past, as well as a good example of the values that built America. Yeah, it's idealized, but you need an ideal to aim towards. You know, you need an ideal to aim towards. So, of course, you're going to have Western heroes that are going to be better than most people probably ever were. Although, again, if you get out and meet a whole lot of people, you find out there's a lot of folks out there that are extremely decent and good people. You know, so they're not just an ideal. They can be pretty darn real. But you get your love, your loyalty, hard work, etc. Give this flick a look in this season if you find the time. Like I said, you can find it on YouTube. You know, maybe someday we'll get a really nice restored version or a clearer copy, but it's clear enough that you could watch it. You might have fun with it. It's not a long movie. It's not a real deep movie. Just, you know, good kind of action comedy with some songs and a nice spirit to it. I really enjoyed it. I've watched it several times now, and it's kind of a Christmas regular for me. Let me know in the comments what you think of this movie. If you've ever seen it before, if you have any questions, be happy to answer them there. If you enjoyed this little review of Trail of Robin Hood from 1950, starring Roy Rogers and Trigger, maybe give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.